Welcome to the Table Podcast, where we discuss issues of God and culture, brought to you by Dallas Theological Seminary.
Welcome to the table. We discuss issues of God and culture, and our topic today is movies. Actually, I should say science fiction in particular, and Star Wars even more specifically, which is an exciting possibility because probably one of the more popular movies ever made, certainly one of the more popular series ever made. And to discuss this, I have a systematic theologian sitting next to me, which is normally the way these things get reviewed, and Michael Svigel, who is Department Chair of Systematic Theology here, and a sci-fi fan. Is that true?
That's true. That's true. I take it.
Okay.
Yep.
So I guess what we need to do is, how long have you been feeling like this? I mean,
I think I was born this way.
Okay.
As far as I can remember, I've been a fan of science fiction in general, but Star Wars in particular. That was my entree into this. So I was born in 73. Star Wars originally, the first one came out in 77. And so I was just young enough for my parents to think that I was old enough to see it.
You saw it at 4 years old?
I saw it at 5. We actually went to a drive-in theater.
Oh,
saw
wow.
it at a drive-in theater. So it was
Okay.
the second run, I guess, of the movie. But my interest in Star Wars, I had an older brother who was about 5-6 years older than me at the time. He was a big Star Wars fan, so of course he had the toys, had the records, and all of those things back then. So some of that kind of rubbed off on me. He passed away when he was 11, just about a year or two later, and I inherited all of his stuff.
Oh, wow.
So I think from early on I had even more than just an interest, maybe this emotional attachment to the series. But then, we were rewarded with a couple of sequels, a couple of prequels, and then they are still making these movies. So it's kept the fandom alive.
That's interesting. So I'm amazed that you could see this at 4. I guess I shouldn't be amazed that you can see this at 4 or 5. My grandsons have responded pretty much the same way. I mean, they can practically take you through the whole movie line by line.
Sure, yeah.
And your interest in science fiction in general, is it fueled pretty much by Star Wars, or?
No, I started with Star Wars and kind of moved on. So I was interested in a lot of the classic sci-fi, as well as what's called the golden age of science fiction. People like Heinlein and Asimov and some of these names, Arthur C. Clarke, both movies and reading. In other words, I was not a very popular kid at school, and always had a book in my. I will own that title as well. Yes.
All right. So, and was it both the creativity of it and the futurism of it? What was the fascination?
Yeah, it was the possibilities, right? You're opening up possibilities. When you're telling a true-to-life story, you're very restricted in place and kinds of characters and such, even though those are tapping into universal themes. With Star Wars and science fiction in general, you can have the same kinds of characters, archetypes, plot movements, but they're exaggerated, right? And so you can put things in sharp relief. You can get away with it in the Star Wars universe with bad guys have red lightsabers, good guys have blue lightsabers. The black and white, that kind of storytelling, things tend to be exaggerated, but then much more kept in contrast with each other. So for simple minds like mine, simple storytelling, it was fun. Plus, it just taps into imagination and the possibilities of pursuits and goals and future, as well as some takes place in the past.
Okay, so we move on in your life, and you become. This is a story of Michael instead of Star Wars, but we move on in your life, and you become interested in theology, etc. But this didn't shed your interest in science fiction.
For a while there, at the beginning in my process of discipleship, I had a hard time figuring out how does science fiction fit. So I kind of set that aside, and however, as I start to see the theology and the Bible in terms of this epic narrative, which is really what it is. It's a story. It's a true story, but it's a story, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has tragedy. It has redemption. And I thought, as many others do, man, all our good stories have these elements. And so a lot of people, a lot of theologians, philosophers, as well as literary experts, they're saying, look, there are some universal truths, universal themes, and universal character archetypes and things that all of our great stories tap into. I call it kind of hacking the mythology. But as a believer, I believe that there is a meta-narrative. There is a story, a true story, where God is the author and the producer and the director, and in Christ, in the incarnation, he's the star that is being told. And so you can find parallels with all great stories, all great epics, Star Wars included. You can find them with these.
Now some people would go, wait a minute. I mean, okay. I mean, the Bible is history and is a true story, and Star Wars is certainly not that.
Sure.
So why think about one in relationship to the other?
Yeah. Well, part of it is, look, almost everybody you meet will have seen Star Wars. Star Wars is a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it is. People are thinking in these terms, illusions, cultural illusions. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And so there are ways people are already thinking about these themes. Good side, bad side, light, dark, predestination, destiny, free choice. There are all of these themes that come up. And they become points of contact, I think, in, hey, you're interested in this story? Let me tell you about something else. And entrees for the gospel and engaging at the level of pop culture. I see a lot of opportunities for that. In fact, I've done that with people.
Yes, I have too, where the storylines converge in such a way that it leads to some basic kinds of thinking. Well, let's turn our attention a little bit to just the theology of narrative in general. I mean, you've already raised words that some people may or may not be familiar, like archetype.
Yeah, archetypes. Yeah.
How should we think about narrative? And this would be true, really, whether we're talking about fiction or nonfiction. There are ways to tell stories and ways to edit them down so they have inherent structure in them. Talk about that a little bit.
That's right. And so what we're used to in our culture is the basic 3-act story. If you're a writer who actually wants to sell books or movies, you're going to follow this structure. And there are certain things, certain character types. So you always have a hero, you have an anti-hero, or a protagonist, antagonist. You have certain types of characters, the wise old sage, Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Gandalf, or Yoda, or some of these characters. They're almost predictable, almost formulaic. And so good storytellers know how to take these archetypes and they do creative, unexpected things with them. I really annoy my wife sometimes when we'll watch a movie about something. I'll say, that guy right there, he's going to die. He's going to give his life for them. He's going to, she's like, stop doing this. Stop that. I was like, it's a formula. And so the best movies toy with the formula and do things in creative ways. But Star Wars is a basic,
good guys,
bad guy, typical archetypes all lined up and doing their thing is pretty predictable.
Okay. So let's turn our attention to Star Wars now. I'm going to start off by mentioning something that people may or may not be aware of. Rogue One.
Yeah.
This sounds like a rogue operation. What in the world is Rogue One, and what does it have to do with Star Wars?
That's the next Star Wars movie coming out. Now, when George Lucas first released Star Wars, what we know as Star Wars in 1977, it was actually Episode 4 with a subtitle of A New Hope. Then Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were Episode 5 and 6. Then he went backwards and did Episodes 1, 2, and 3. And then now Disney and Lucasfilm, they're producing 3 more, 7, 8, and 9. 7 has come out. That's The Force Awakens. But what they're also doing on the off years is producing what we might call spin-offs or going backwards in the timeline and focusing on a certain
like
character.
A franchise to me.
It sounds like quite a lucrative opportunity. But Rogue One, it's going to confuse some people. It actually takes place right before in the timeline before the very original Star Wars movie came out. So
it fits between, what, 3 and 4?
Right, correct.
Okay.
Yep. And so it is a story of the very first battle that the Rebel Alliance wins when they steal Death Star plans.
Oh, okay.
So
and
that's the story.
And that is going to be out when?
That's December 16th, 2016.
Oh, you know exactly. Do you know
it's my wife's birthday. It's my wife's birthday.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be a tough decision.
Okay.
I think I know where I'm going to take her. Exactly.
Yeah. So, well.
So that's the next one coming out, and then they're rolling them out pretty much every year.
I see.
From this point on.
Interesting. So let's. In
other words, there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there is a lot to talk
culture.
about. So we've got the Star Wars movie that and the sequence. Why do you think? I have my ideas on this. Why do you think this particular sequence or series has struck such a nerve?
Part of it is the anything's cool with a lightsaber in it. You have to admit, right? You can take a bad Star Wars movie, exactly,
old, right?
exactly. Yeah. And then it awakens the 5-year-old in all of us. Any kid who's seen Star Wars is picking up any straight object and swinging it like a lightsaber. So there's that. There's just the obvious action adventure. It's a spectacle, and it tickles the senses, but. Also, there's something there. There's this good and evil. There are these themes that are being tapped into. Books have been written expounding on them from psychological, philosophical, and theological perspectives. So even though you can be a 5-year-old like I was and just see the surface level lights and sounds and the score, the music, but then you can also think about it more deeply, and you realize there's a lot of stuff going on here that to think about and to talk about, and it tugs at you at an emotional level as well.
Okay, but I think the fact would be that someone could look at that stuff and go, well, yeah, and other people would go, I don't think so.
Right, that's been done. There have been different Christian approaches to Star Wars.
So there are Christian approaches to Star Wars.
Yeah, there have been.
There have been.
Yep, still are.
And?
Yeah, would you like me to tell you
sure,
these?
Go for it.
Okay. I actually brought a couple of exhibits here. And this is not to pass judgment on them, and in some sense, both of them are true. But it shows you two extremes here on how Christians have approached Star Wars. One of them is called "The Force of Star Wars," and basically, this author Frank Allnut goes through the narrative and the characters and draws specific parallels to Christianity and to, in fact, eschatology, end times things, and ends up basically sharing the gospel with it, trying to lead people to Christ.
Now, does he have a particular eschatology while he does this? I mean, is there a...
It's ours. It's a DTS eschatology.
He's premillennial.
Pre-mill, pre-trib.
Pre-trib?
Oh, yeah. But then he says, you need to be ready and be on the light side.
Wow.
So it's almost a thick gospel tract.
Okay.
And the other extreme, so this one is a very positive use of Star Wars for evangelism. The opposite approach, and very common, is Norm Geisler co-authored this, but a Religion of the Force, which does legitimately point out there are a lot of Eastern mysticism, Zen Buddhism parallels as well in some of the spirituality of Star Wars, and basically says this is not the gospel. This is some dangerous spirituality as well that could lead people astray. And so these represent, in my mind, two, I guess, ends of the spectrum of how you can engage in pop culture. You condemn it and point out its dangers, or you can kind of embrace it and share the gospel. And I, of course, try to find a mediating position. I do think that there are positive uses of media, pop culture, movies, where we can have these points of contact that may not exist otherwise.
Interesting. It seems to me that someone who is designing and writing this, who has a feel for culture at large, might keep these themes rather ambiguous so that people can go in a variety of ways. Do you think
I think that's true, and that was George Lucas. George Lucas, who created and wrote these Star Wars movies, he really, besides basic morality, good and evil, and restoring this idea of, look, there is more to life than just self. He was writing in the 70s in decadence as well as despondence in many ways, and trying to speak into that culture.
Nothing's changed since
exactly. If anything, got worse. But he didn't have any particular spiritual theological agenda, and so really you do see blatant borrowing from Christian imagery and themes, as well as borrowing from anything that he could weave together to tell a story.
This raises an interesting question. It's kind of a subterranean question, and that is, when you look at literature as a whole, and there are a lot of cosmic themes, some of which are very Christian in their origins, some of which are not necessarily Christian, but generally archetypal to go to the general category. And most literary people are very aware of those kinds of themes. Most very good English literature programs and university campuses and that kind of thing major in making people who take English literature familiar with this kind of background, especially even if they've never darkened the door of a church, because it's so pervasive, particularly in Western literature. So it shouldn't be surprising that some of these themes come up in this kind of a way.
Yeah, and they always will come up. The whole idea of the Redeemer who sacrifices himself for others, it's almost essential in every story to some degree. It may not be a physical sacrifice, but somebody has to give himself or herself up for something. It's almost always the case. There's always the story of the hero who is going from the known to the unknown and coming back again and learning something and growing from that. And so you see parallels to the Christian biblical narrative. You also see parallels to each person's spiritual journey in faith. And so there are all of these themes that pop up all the time. So it's funny, you see a lot of people say, look, this movie, The Matrix or whatever, is the gospel. And you have series of books written, the gospel according to XYZ. And it's not that these authors are intentionally drawing on Christian themes. It's just that they're tapping into these universal truths.
And those truths, because in some cases they have connections to Christian themes, lend themselves in this kind of direction.
Yep.
So, we're obviously having fun with all of this. So someone comes along and says, all right, so what should I think about when I watch Star Wars, and what are some of the bridges that come out of popular culture and move in this direction?
Yeah, that's good. First of all, there's the obvious theme of good versus evil, and then there are always, in good storytelling, characters that are not so black and white, at least on the surface. There's a lot of social, political commentary going on sometimes in these films that is a little subtle, but we can use these things to bring up very real world matters of good and evil. I mean, we are fast approaching a cultural situation where everything is gray, or black and white, and good and evil is really a matter of perspective. And these themes, I think, a classic, epic, good versus evil story can remind us that look, we resonate with this story because deep down inside, God has written on our hearts this conscience, and we have this sense of right and wrong, and this taps into that. We can relate to that. So at a very level of good versus evil, I think that theme is something that we can take from this. But also this approach to the struggle, the conflict that we feel. There's a spiritual conflict. There's spiritual growth going on in these characters. In every great epic story, there's growth through conflict. We can tap into those things. There are also very obvious illustrations of redemption. Redemption is in almost every story. It's a universal theme. And we can draw direct parallels, very easy usually, the theme of redemption to the cross and to the resurrection and to restoration. And so themes of hope, themes of commitment, themes of love, themes of self-sacrifice, themes of self-control and reward. So at the level of themes and storytelling in that regard, these are very, very rich wells of resources.
So how should we pursue this? Should we pursue this kind of by character or by conflict? What's the best? I mean, I could think about, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia. I mean, there'd be lots of ways to think about this. Yeah,
generally the way storytellers think about it is they think about it in terms of a journey or even a cycle or a circle. And so interestingly, these cycles tend to match the biblical story. You start out in paradise, and through some kind of a fall, you're in hell or damnation or some kind of a fallen state, and then the conflict and the struggle through redemption to restore it to paradise. And every story begins somewhere on that circle. And so you usually have in Star Wars, they're beginning in this state of oppression and darkness and this fall. You don't know how you got there, but they're in the process of restoring through
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Help me.
Obi-Wan's coming back. Exactly. Hope, right?
Yeah, right.
And what does Obi-Wan Kenobi do?
Yeah.
He sacrifices himself in order to save the hero, and that is a epochal, pivotal moment for Luke Skywalker. And so we can see these things in all kinds of great narratives. Rocky, he's starting out in the inner city of Philadelphia. He meets the wise old trainer.
Right.
And what does he do? He comes out, wearing the having
whatever.
Well, you got to get. I was going to say he comes out as a winner, but everybody knows in the first one he doesn't actually win the fight. But you get the picture. It's it's the same cycle, and so we think in terms of plot line and themes, but also you can find parallels with individual characters and some of the struggles and conflicts. It's a fun conversation to have, especially with doubters and unbelievers.
Yeah, because you can raise all kinds of themes. Of course, part of the I actually think one of the attractive elements of science fiction is it makes you think about life, but it makes you think about life in a completely different lens. And so the world that's being portrayed is imaginative. It's different, but the human conflicts that you're running into are very, very similar, real. And you can connect to.
The stories in the universes are very, very strange, but eerily familiar. And you can, and people are more than willing to talk about a movie. In fact, they want to. A lot of people want to talk this out afterwards.
Right.
We as Christians who have a story that is genuinely redemptive, doesn't make you feel good, merely feel good, it can actually change your life.
The scene that pops into my mind are the bar scenes where you've got all these strange creatures, and yet it's eerily similar to something you might see in a Western.
Correct.
I mean, the characters that you get are packaged certainly differently, but the emotions that they're displaying, you could have seen, in the 1800s in the far West.
That's right. Yeah.
We're going to broaden this out a little bit and go to some movies that I've seen recently, but that Michael hasn't. But we're going to comment on some of the themes because I think it'll show the consistency, if you will, of the way in which stories oftentimes get told and the way in which they can work and sometimes help us understand what's going on and what the draw might be. And so the first movie I want to talk about is Hacksaw Ridge, which is a Mel Gibson directed movie that's slated for the latter part of this year, 2016. And it's a true story. It's of a fellow named Desmond Doss, who's a Seventh-day Adventist, who didn't believe in killing. Not just didn't believe in killing, he didn't believe you should pick up a weapon and fight. And the interesting thing about the story is that he ends up being enlisted in the Army during World War II and sent to the Pacific. What do you call them? Not coast, but Pacific. What do you call it? I'm having a blank. The Pacific region or the theater. That's the word I'm thinking of. So being sent to the Pacific Theater to fight, but he's trained in such a way that the day they hand out the weapons, there's a scene where they're handing out all the weapons and everyone walks up and grabs theirs, and he stays in line and doesn't go and pick up a rifle. And he's in the Army.
Yeah.
So, kind of
awkward.
Mega awkward.
You kind of notice that.
Exactly right. Everyone's got a weapon, he doesn't, and the sergeant comes up to him and says, something wrong here? Something. He goes, yeah, I don't believe in fighting. And he said, I wrote the Army about this, saying I was a conscientious objector, and this is they said it would be okay, and it was no one at the Post knew about this, and so it wasn't quite so okay. So the first part of the movie is about how they try and drum him out. Basically, they do everything. They beat him up. They try and shame him every way possible. I guess this is a spoiler alert. To try and get him to quit, and he won't quit. He wants to sign up to be a medic. So he says, "I'm signing up for something. Yeah, I want to save lives. I don't want to kill them." You've got how the plot is developing very nicely, and so he ends up going to war. He makes it through. He goes to war as a medic, and they go to battle, and he's not carrying a weapon. How do you do that?
Right.
And then in the end of the story, I won't try and spoil it too much, but he ends up being a hero in the way he handles the combat situation without ever picking up a weapon. And so the whole thing is kind of this. Let's put it this way: it's not your mother's war movie or your
this
father's
isn't a
war
Rambo
movie.
sequel.
No, that's
obviously, right.
You said how some stories play with normal, what we call tropes, normal pictures or metaphors, and play with them. Well, this one is playing with it big time, because the whole plot is wrapped up in how does someone join the Army and never pick up a rifle.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun. I'm going to look forward to seeing this because, in every story, every character has a weapon. It's not always a physical weapon like a sword or a lightsaber or a gun, but there's something that the character wields that gives the character the strength.
In this case, it's his moral convictions.
It's his moral fortitude,
That's right.
And that's and it's always challenged. They have to learn how to wield it. They have to wield it imperfectly in various circumstances. So that's the, as a storyteller, you're always thinking, what is this character's weapon? How does he come by it? And what strength, what character conviction and strength is it actually going to illustrate? Because everything in story is metaphor. If it's not metaphor, you're not really telling a story. You're just, you're taking pictures. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. So that's in a very important point, that a character's weapon or symbol of strength is not always going to be
an actual
a literal
physical weapon.
Yeah. So and Mel Gibson has been really, whatever you think of him personally, he's been really good at picking and producing, directing stories that tap in intentionally into these moral issues, moral conflicts, and spiritual truths. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, another interesting feature of this movie, and we actually do hope to do a podcast on this in the future, is the way in which the violence and realism gets depicted against the backdrop of Christian standards.
Yeah.
So how do you tell the story, tell a real gruesome war story, and handle the violence, handle the language that comes with the event, those kinds of things, the choices that a story teller, a writer, has to make. In this case, you've got a little bit of help because this is not made up. This is something that really happened. So they're depicting something that's real, but we also know that there are certain liberties that they took with that to package the story, that kind of thing. There are those kinds of choices going on, which people who watch movies about real events oftentimes struggle with.
Yeah.
They don't give the artist the license to move around in terms of what they do.
Yeah, and this is especially difficult for Christian writers, Christian filmmakers, because on the one hand, you don't want gratuitous celebration of violence. It's that's not our value. This isn't our worldview. On the other hand, you don't want to portray a world that doesn't exist.
There's a real world out there that's fallen.
And one thing about the Bible, in fact, I've had Muslim encounters with Muslim friends that complain about some of the realistic violence and things that are in our Bibles. The pictures of depravity and people's sin in the Bible, and that how can that be a holy book with all of this, rape and incest and murder and these kinds of things? And we say, look, it's telling the way it really is. This is real life,
right?
And so we're not sugarcoating life. We're not creating fairy tales here. And so there is this balance of, for me, and this is one of those gray issues where Christians are going to need to think through this. For me, if it's gratuitous and unnecessary to the storytelling, it really annoys me. I'll walk out of something like that. But if it is important to the story, I would imagine that for that film, that it's going to be an important point of his context and contrast that's challenging his conviction and putting him at risk, putting him to the test, and you need to feel like the threat is real, right?
That's right.
And so, especially that kind of a war film, you can get by with it without being too graphic, but you still, I think, need, in order to tell the story rightly, need to have some realism.
Yeah, and I think that the issue for that film is how much is enough.
Yeah.
How long should it go for? Those
it
kinds
becomes
of
gratuitous,
questions.
and that's almost an art.
Right.
You have to kind of know as a storyteller how much is too much.
Well, that's movie number one. Let's shift to another one, completely different era. Okay, from World War II, we go to the Roman Empire. And the refilming of Ben-Hur, tied to Mark Burnett and Roma Downey, and we saw this one over the weekend in part because I've done consultation work with them in relationship to the earlier Bible series and that kind of thing, and this one struck me as odd, and I'll be interested to get your reaction to this. We went in, and of course we were thinking, well, this is a retelling of a classic, so you're already up against it. I mean, this is one of the
you have something to live up to.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really easy to fail.
You're one of the great movies of all time. I mean, you can put a list of the top 10, and the original Ben-Hur is probably on it. And so you've got that up against, and then something hit me that I hadn't anticipated. Of course, it's a remake, which means that it's not in 1950s Technicolor.
Right.
Okay, it's in super 4K. I don't know how else to talk about it. I mean, the cinematography was so stunning and precise that it was like I'm not seeing an ancient story.
Right.
And I went, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
The expectations about what a film talking about a dark and dusty past time,
right?
Not looking very dark and dusty, or looking too dark and too dusty. You can take your pick.
It's tricky, and this is the responsibility of the production designer, the producer has to figure out what tones, what color schemes. I mean, these are conversations they spend hours and hours and weeks on before they even film one frame of the thing. So, color scheme. What's your palette? It's art. This is not just telling a story. If you're just writing a novel, you don't have to worry about color schemes per se. But when you're putting that on screen, and so you'll one film, it's an apocalyptic sci-fi kind of film called The Road, and it's almost black and white. It's not, but it's almost black and white, and that is intended to communicate this feeling of despair, of hopelessness, and then you add splashes of color into that kind of thing, and those really stand out in contrast. So what you're experiencing is obviously an intentional decision by production designers to film things at a certain pace with certain colors. Maybe not the best choice. I don't know. Especially with an original Ben-Hur that they're going to be comparing it to. So what was your emotional response to those?
It was a good story. It was a core story. I mean, you knew where the story was going in many ways. So it didn't have quite the drama of how this was going to work out that you might normally feel of a story that you weren't quite so familiar with, that kind of thing. So I considered it to be a rather average movie, for lack of a better description. Entertaining. I mean, worth in one sense worth the time if you're just going out to the movie to be entertained. But it wasn't the experience that either Hacksaw Ridge had been because of the way it confronts you with war and choices, or another movie we'll be talking about shortly that I'm going to raise. But I do have one more thing I want to say about the Ben-Hur movie that's interesting. You talked about palettes and tones, and when I've done this consulting work for movies, the thing that strikes me are the kinds of questions I get asked. When I do my New Testament stuff, I'm being asked about theology and, what did people believe, that kind of thing. What movie script writers will write me about is, what did the crucifixion look like?
Yeah.
What shape was the cross?
Yeah.
What's the background? How did it go into the ground?
Yeah.
Really, for lack of a better description, earthy kinds of questions. I mean, every day, when they sat down to a meal, what did that look? I often tell people, our picture of the Lord's Supper, kind of the Leonardo da Vinci guys at the table picture, is actually not how it happened in the first century. They tended to sit in a U. If it was a very formal meal, there might not even be a table. There might not even be chairs. They're actually reclining on the ground at an angle off of one elbow. A completely different picture than what we think of as a meal. And a cinematographer and a director and a screenwriter have to be aware of all that. And then
make a decision about whether it's worth trying to
recreate it. Exactly right. And where they go, this seems so foreign. Will this really work? Or do we, modernize it? Which, interestingly, another artistic choice, completely different genre. You've watched operas update themselves by really recasting the scene, not in the original time in which it's written or setting, but modernize them. Tell the same story with the same lyrics, but completely different clothes and background to give it a more modern feel.
Which goes back to our original discussion that, look, there are these themes that whether you put them in World War I or the Jewish Revolt, there are going to be these universal themes that can kind of come out in any context.
Exactly. So it produces a very fascinating kind of set of it always amazes me. Well, two things amaze me. I'm in the habit, my wife has gotten used to this. At the end of a movie, I will sit and I will watch the credits. And it's a way I remind myself of, look at all the people it took to make this happen. It's kind of my way of saying, I appreciate the effort of all these people who went to put this together. And, it's myriads of people. I mean, it isn't just the actors.
And especially in high stunt, special effects, those kinds of things.
I mean, there's technological stuff going on. There's very physical stuff going on in certain movies. And so it's my way of reminding what it takes to put something like this together. It's also another way of underscoring another thing that we like to talk about at the center, and that is the value of the variety of vocations that people undertake. That there's a way in which they contribute and serve us that sometimes we think consciously about it and appreciate, and sometimes we don't. So this is kind of the way I appreciate those things. And so, the decisions that they face and have to make, both just art and technically, are sometimes very, very amazing. The creativity that goes, here I've got a story, but I don't have any colors. I don't have any clothes that are predisposed, that I'm predisposed towards. I might have a time period, but that's all I've got to work with, the story and the time period. And look at all the detail that has to be fleshed out on the screen. It's an amazing thing to think about. Well, let's go to the third movie. We're jumping around. Okay, we've gone from Star Wars to a war film, Hacksaw Ridge. We've gone to Ben-Hur, which takes us back into the time of the first century in a kind of depiction in the context of the crucifixion and that kind of thing. The last movie that's come out recently it has a completely different feel to it is Pete's Dragon. Now, this is yet another genre. Okay, this is really a kids movie. It's designed to celebrate, in many ways, the imagination. And what these producer and director did with this story was, rather than tell it as an animation, which is the way it's traditionally been told, they used real actors, real settings, and they devised a mechanical reproduction of Pete Dragon and a not just mechanical but technological. I mean, it flies CGI and et cetera. It uses all the technology to get this mixture, and so it has a very real feel to it. And of course, part of the story is that some people can't believe that this kid has hung out with Pete's Dragon, and plays with you that way. And it works very hard on some core emotional stereotypes. A kid who's lost a mother and father in a car wreck, who ends up being nurtured by this dragon, and then gets discovered and has to re-enter the real world, but he doesn't want to leave the relationship that he's had. So
this plot is starting out on that cycle. It's starting out with this kid in perdition in some sense.
Exactly right.
He has to. It's interesting. Usually, it's a Luke Skywalker story. He's starting out on this desert planet far away from everything, and is being introduced into this bigger world. And in
one sense, he's rescued immediately.
Yeah.
You know, this dragon comes along and cares for him. It's a healthy relationship. There's no real tension in what's going on between them. In fact, the early part of the movie is showing the bonding of their relationship and how comfortable they feel with one another, that kind of thing. And the tension is introduced until people come back into the story.
Yeah, right.
You know, and try and pull this child out of this relationship that he has with the dragon, and everyone coping. I mean, the bad guys are the good guys.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we're back to the archetype that gets played with.
Exactly.
And
you see the same kinds of themes in movies like E.T., right? And the guys, the scientists, the people that's probably the role we'd take. There's an alien. Oh my gosh, there's an alien in your closet.
Yeah.
Run.
Right.
But actually, no, he's my friend.
Or get rid of him.
We have this relationship,
exactly.
And so there's that's a common theme.
Yeah. And so we watch this play itself out, and the variety of relationships, the way in which he ends up in the movie bonding to at least a couple of people who try and rescue him on the one hand, but he doesn't want to lose this relationship that he has with this dragon. But no one else is going to tolerate his having this relationship. Yeah. And that's the tension in the story, and you watch that get resolved and play itself out. And so it's a completely, we've picked here 4 different films in some ways that do very different things, and yet at the core,
doing the same thing,
similar kinds of things in terms of the tension and choices that people have that draw them into the movie. So I've shared some of the movies I've seen recently. Are there any you've seen recently that draw your attention in this kind of a direction?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly watching films, TV shows, things like this to try to keep up to the degree that I can in various genres. Obviously Star Wars has been on my mind lately. I saw, what some of the filmmakers are doing with the Star Trek series. It's a whole nother.
Yeah.
Now, I've been told that you can't be a Star Wars fan and a Star Trek fan, but I've had no problem with that.
Okay.
I've been able to pull that off. So Star Trek, I can't think. On long flights, I'll watch several different films, catch up.
I know how
some of the
works.
Superhero movies, which, by the way, superhero movies are also technically categorized as science fiction.
Right.
If you think about those stories, again, there's usually some kind of a science element going on there. Or, I mean, Superman is an alien, folks. He's come to Earth to save us. But so I've been watching some of those things. But yeah.
Well, let me ask you this question, because someone could be listening to this and going, now, wait a minute. We've got 2 theologians sitting at the table talking about all this stuff that doesn't mean anything, or seemingly might be viewed as a
waste of
time or a waste of energy or whatever. But there actually is a rhyme or reason to this. What is the rhyme or reason to it?
Yeah. So like I said just a second ago, I said I'm trying to keep up. There is a sense in which I feel a responsibility. I'm not going to place this burden on others, but I do feel a responsibility to know what is going on in popular culture. What are people being bombarded with? What are they being exposed to? What are they thinking about, even if they don't know it? And you would not be able to convince me that they're not thinking about Star Wars because they're being constantly bombarded by this. So things like this, and it does give me an opportunity then to bring things up. I actually use it in my teaching, for illustrative purposes.
You really are strange.
Oh yeah. No, so illustrations, preaching illustrations,
absolutely.
Very practical things like
core
this. Core metaphors that every culture. The Bible does it.
Right.
Everyday experiences become the basis of parables. Everyday experiences in our Western culture become the basis for sermon illustrations or things to try to drive home a point. So I use it constantly that way. But I need to know what's going on. I need to know how to communicate with my kids because, even if I tell them no on everything, they're still going to be exposed to this. We're swimming in it. And so we need to know what's going on. We can't afford to be completely ignorant of what's going on in culture.
And it does produce some pretty interesting potential opportunities to have some conversations that, at least initially, are non-threatening and raise issues and themes that people do think about. I mean, a really good piece of film, a really good piece of art does make you think about life core issues.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
To go way back, the Da Vinci Code. You know a little bit about that?
Yeah,
you
right.
Remember this one?
Exactly.
I had a friend who, when that thing came out, read the book and asked me about what is going on here.
Yeah.
And I hadn't heard of it really, so I had to pick it up, read it, and of course, I happen to be early Christian history. Yeah, I'm on that. Yeah. But I was able to share with him some other things, and he actually, through that wrestling, came to Christ through the Da Vinci Code, right? The questions and issues that came up with that, and the way may be more circuitous and less direct through something like Star Wars or Pete's Dragon. But you open those possibilities up for discussions, and if you know what you're doing, you can lead them there.
I have a close friend. In fact, he's been a guest on the podcast from Turkey, a Muslim background believer whose first step into faith was watching the original Ben-Hur.
Wow.
He saw the crucifixion, and he said, that's not what we were told as Muslims, and he got curious about it and pursued it, and that's how he came to faith. Well, Michael, believe it or not, we're out of time. So I appreciate your stopping in to give us kind of this journey through the movies, Star Wars et al., and it's been a fascinating conversation. We hope you've enjoyed it. We appreciate your listening to us on the table and hope you're back again with us soon. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Table Podcast. For more podcasts like this one, visit dts.edu/the table. Dallas Theological Seminary. Teach truth, love well.